If you're an aspiring beauty photographer, you've probably come across a few hurdles or issues when actually photographing. And with some of these issues, you may not actually know what's wrong in particular with some of your images, but you definitely know that something might be a little bit off or something's not quite right. And I'm actually filming this video today based on a lot of my coaching sessions that I've had with previous students who have found certain things about their beauty photography which they weren't liking but didn't really know how to fix it. I also don't often see a lot of these things spoken about, so in this video today I'm going to be talking about some of the mistakes you might be making with your beauty photography and how you can fix them. For those of you who are new here, hi, my name's Kaylee and I'm a beauty and fashion photographer based near Sydney, Australia. And in the last 10 years or so, I started this channel to talk about all things photography and retouching. So as I mentioned in today's video, we are going to be going through some of the mistakes you may be making with your beauty photography. And I do want you to keep in mind that when I say mistakes, I think that there's a lot of rules that are meant to be broken with photography and specifically with fashion and beauty. But I do think that there are a few things that may look less flattering or less ideal in your photographs that you may want to rectify. So we're really going to go through some of those aspects today. So one of the number one things that I've found a lot of my coaching students have actually had issues with in the past with photographing beauty is actually with using a silver or gold reflector. And I'm going to put this as mistake number one. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, you can break these rules. I think you can absolutely use a silver or gold reflector in beauty photography, but it is going to have a specific effect or styled effect that you may not necessarily want. And usually for a lot of beauty photographers and a lot of beauty photography, this is not really an effect that you will usually want on the regular. So with using a silver or gold reflector with a lot of your beauty photos, you may find that it does cast very unwanted tones on the skin, particularly with a gold reflector. With a gold reflector, you're really going to see a lot of orange tones creeping into the skin, and the face will tend to be illuminated in a way that you may not want as well. And that goes for silver too. Silver will tend to make the skin look quite metallic in areas, and it's funny because I actually used to use a silver reflector quite often when I was starting beauty photography, and I really liked initially the effect that it created until I started to refine my work a lot more and I started to realize that it was tending to make the skin look very shiny and very metallic in a way that I just didn't like. And I actually found it wasn't very helpful for me in the retouching process either because the skin just didn't look natural enough. So with using a white reflector instead, you'll tend to find that the light is a lot more diffused when it's bounced back into the face, and it will tend to have the skin looking a lot more kind of matte in that instance. And it actually does help a lot with when you're retouching. Now, as I mentioned, you can absolutely use a silver and gold reflector if it's part of the style that you want for your photo shoot, but I do feel like on the regular, it's not usually something that a lot of beauty photographers will want to use unless it's a particularly styled effect that they're going for. Especially if you're trying to do more commercial style photography or skincare kind of photography where you need the skin to look really natural and really nicely textured, not too shiny. A lot of the time, these types of reflectors will really bounce light everywhere on the face, and it can seem a bit unflattering or not ideal overall. Now, a second really common mistake that I see with a lot of beauty photography is having the shadows on the background. So again, if you're doing a stylized shot where you want to show the shadows on the background, that's totally fine and each to their own. But more often than not, it is kind of seen as a little bit of a mistake having those shadows apparent on the background. Now, this a lot of the time will happen when your model is too close to the backdrop and not far enough forward. So usually this is really just a matter of asking your model to take a few steps forward so you'll see that shadow disappear on the backdrop. However, this can actually happen as well when the light is too low. You will tend to see that bit more of the shadow on the background as well, so just keep that in mind. And that actually brings me to my third mistake, which is the lighting is too high or too low. Now, this is another really common thing that I see a lot of beauty photographers struggling with, especially in the beginning of their careers. They tend to find that it's really hard to get the lighting exactly right, and especially the positioning of it. Now, more often than not, if you're looking for something that's quite flattering on the vast majority of people, having the light raised higher and angled down will really help eliminate any of those weird shadows or any sort of flatness that the lighting creates if it's too low. Because usually that's what will tend to happen if the light is too low and it's directed at someone's face. It will just look very flat overall, the lighting, and it won't really create much definition or too many shadows, and the person's face won't really tend to stand out as much in the shot. Then obviously if the light is way too high and it's angled down, you'll see that there's a lot of shadows that tend to happen underneath the eyes, and it just tends to look too harsh overall. So I tend to find having it raised higher but angled down is a good thing, but not too high. If it's at the right spot, you'll tend to find that it creates that really nice butterfly lighting with the shadows in the right places, but the higher you go, as I mentioned, it will start to make those shadows look really pronounced and really not ideal overall. Now, mistake number 4 is not actually adjusting a lighting setup for the model that you're photographing. So everyone's face is completely different, and you'll find that not every lighting setup will work for every person. So it's really good to observe their features even prior to the shoot, definitely looking at previous images of them, what lighting looks best potentially, or what really highlights their best features, and remembering that for the day of your shoot. Now, for example, you might have a lighting setup in mind that you've set up on the day, but there's a few different ways you can tweak this setup to make it look the best for the model that you're photographing. Now, whether that's using modifiers such as polyboards, whether that's black or white to help reflect or absorb the light, depending on what you need, or even using a small white reflector as well. Using some of these tools can really help you to easily tweak the setup that you have for the person that you're photographing. So it's definitely really important to keep this in mind, and not every setup is going to look perfect for every single person that you photograph. And then mistake number 5 could be a little bit of a controversial one, but overall I think it's a really important one to remember, and it's using a lens that is too wide. Now, using a wide angle lens for beauty photographs doesn't tend to work on a few levels, because obviously there is going to be distortion with the model's features, which may not always be so flattering, but also you're not able to get a lot closer up to the model's face and really look at those details, which a lot of beauty photography is all about. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, if you have got a more stylized shoot with this and you want to use a wide angle lens to kind of create that little bit of weird distortion, and that's kind of the style you're going for, again, totally fine, but more often than not, you'll find that you don't necessarily want this effect. So I tend to use lenses that are longer, so anything over around 85 millimeters I tend to find really good for beauty photography, and it just tends to flatten out the facial features a little bit more, allowing you to get in a little bit closer and capture some of those details that you might want to capture. But overall, those are the 5 mistakes that I would avoid on beauty photography shoots, and some of those things I feel are just normal learning curves. As you're making your way up as a young photographer, you'll tend to come across these things and tend to find what works for you as well, and just remembering some of these mistakes or these rules, I guess, in a way that you can then break them if you need to, and really go with your own flow or style when you want to as well. But it's also important to know why some of these things don't look as great as you might have thought they would in camera. And as I mentioned, a lot of my coaching students in the past have sort of picked up on a lot of these elements in their photos, and they've asked me why their photos look this way or what they can do to fix those particular things. So it's actually been a bit of a decoding process in the past of what equipment they've used and what they've been doing on set to kind of achieve those effects, and then kind of working from there. But I hope overall you enjoyed this video today, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, make sure you do, because I'll be posting a lot more videos like this one in future. Let me know as well in the comments what you'd like to see on my channel. I always love taking requests. But thank you again so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.